Hello, my name is Nancy Strickland Fields, and I'm the director of the Museum of the Southeast American Indian in Pembroke, North Carolina, on the campus of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. I'm excited to talk with you today about American Indian veterans and soldiers and mental health, and how Native soldiers and veterans have a unique way of managing and healing from the experience of serving both in the military and in battle. So I want to start with American Indian veterans. American Indians and Alaska Natives serve in the American forces at 5 times the national average and have served with distinction in every major conflict for over 200 years. During World War I, 3,000 to 6,000 American Indians enlisted and another 6,500 were drafted. And this is data provided by the National Indian Council on Aging in 2019. So this leads to the question about why do so many Native people serve in the military, especially the largest per capita among the United States. So there is a tradition among American Indian culture of warrior societies. And so by serving in the military, this continues that tradition of being a warrior and carrying on that legacy of warrior societies. This also provides a unique opportunity to defend homelands. With so much that has happened over the past 300 years in terms of colonization, Native people still regard their homelands as their ancestral lands, and serving in the military provides a unique way to defend those homelands. Along with that, it provides a unique way to defend family and community, just like many other folks that enlist in the military. It also demonstrates patriotism, political beliefs, and allegiance to America. And then lastly, again, pretty much like most people that enlist, it offers a career track, financial stability, the experience of travel and meeting other service people, and adventure opportunities. There is an enduring profile of a soldier that dates back to that warrior spirit, and that is a soldier who is committed to their family. They want to honor their ancestors and their tribe. We also have a strong belief among American Indian societies and communities that you do not express physical or mental weakness. And so a way of demonstrating this to your community or to your tribe is by being a soldier, and by being a strong soldier who displays physical and mental prowess and strength. And we also have a history of character this isn't perfect, and this will actually lend itself to our conversation in a few minutes, but the understanding that failure is not an option. And we know that this, of course, is not humanly possible, but it is something that soldiers to aspire to and can contribute to some of the issues of failure or disappointment, perhaps in performance, or even lending to the harsh realities from the battlefield. So I want to talk a little bit about why, again, Native people serve at such a high rate, and some of the perspective about why we serve that might be a little bit different from other service people, but also lends itself to compounding the mental health issues that are related to military service. One of the first is a loss of land. And what goes hand in hand with that is also a loss of sovereignty. And this can motivate both men and women to join the military as a way to assert and create new means of independence and inclusion within America. So when you think about American Indian tribes that lived on certain lands, their homelands, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, governed themselves sovereignly as an independent people, their own government, their own military, their own warring issues with other tribes or issues of agency, even with early colonial governments. This loss of land and loss of sovereignty dealt a huge blow and impact to the mental wellness of not only leadership among tribes, but how it trickled down to the overall community and people and how they lived out their everyday lives. The change that came with these two factors of loss of land and sovereignty, and even contributed to removal in the 1830s, factors into mental health and also how Native people aspire to join the military. This reality brought mental emotion and emotional urgency surrounding the devastation and loss and change that was rapidly taking hold as early as the 1600s, all the way through really today. And sometimes this loss, as expressed by veterans and soldiers who are in active duty, can be overbearing. So I wanted to walk through five different wartime eras and look at some of the issues that are uniquely connected to these specific wars and Native people. So first, in terms of an American war, was the Revolutionary War. And what this did for Native people is it questioned allegiance to the colonies or to the crown. And this put in central to that allegiance was the political and social ramifications of both. So during at the dawn of the American Revolution, you had some tribes that were loyal to the crown and the political realities and the economic realities of being loyal to the crown, even as it was carried out across an ocean here in what would become America. And then you had tribes that were also connected to the colonies. And you already had Native people who were believed in these ideas of individualism as tribal peoples or as tribes politically organized, who were part of, even were called settlement Indians, who were living around like the South Carolina colony, especially around Charleston, who believed in the new values that related to American Indian culture, but were also uniquely American in their design and thinking. So there was a lot of change, but there was also a lot of ideals and new realities that were taking hold that really were anchored right at the core of the premise of the American Revolutionary War. So the result of that was that you had Native people serving on both sides. So for instance, there were Shawnees that were loyal to the crown, and then you had Cherokees who some were loyal to the colonies. I am Lumbee, so within the Lumbee tribe, there was also soldiers who were serving on both sides, and we're going to talk about a Lowry soldier who is a Whig patriot, and we're going to talk about his service here in a little bit. The War of 1812 was really sparked out of settler colonialism and pressures, and it was due in part to Indian resistance. So here's a war after the Revolutionary War that really factors in these concepts of sovereignty, patriotism, and Indian resistance to colonial settler colonialism as it moved not only through the Carolinas but further west. So this war was really sparked with colonial settlers, especially the French and the English in the New World. And then, of course, you had Native people that fought on both sides. The Civil War called into question the antebellum way of life and squarely placed the ideals of freedom and liberty on the conscience of Native people. Again, the duality of siding with both sides of the ideals of a war. There were some Native people that sided with Confederacy that were actually plantation-owning, slave-owning peoples that were benefiting from the antebellum period. Economically were benefiting from that. And then, of course, there were people that fought on the opposite side of that, on the Union side, that believed in the ideals of that side of the war. And again, these mental pressures of what is at stake and what Native people were fighting for played out in their mental health later in life. World Wars I and World War II caused Native people to demonstrate worth and assimilation as patriots. So we've taken a big leap here from the 1800s into the turn of the century. And as America was really refining its understanding of identity and heritage and history for that matter, and also traditions, it was also shaping up with this concept of what it meant to be a patriot and to be an American. And so to be an acceptable soldier and a subsequent veteran, there was a drastic amount of assimilation that happened among American Indian people, and they felt that they needed to demonstrate that both on the battlefield and in service with their fellow soldiers. What that did was that fully put into jeopardy their own Native identity through assimilation. Vietnam, of course, was built on a draft. And so here you have a circumstance where you don't have, per se, Native people that are enlisting by their own will for either side of supporting the political ideas of a war, but were drafted. Yet there were some that also enlisted into the Vietnam War for the things that we've talked about. Some of these folks were then hearkening back to World War I and World War II to honor a family legacy of service. So this fully realized American version of war. We will look at the legacy of Delano Cummings, who was Lumbee, who was drafted and then re-enlisted 3 additional times in service as a Marine. And then subsequent wars moving forward were firmly rooted in the Native American tradition of serving the United States military as a sense of honor and obligation and honoring ancestors. So we've talked about service in the military, starting back to the Revolutionary War, and we've talked about the profile of a soldier or a veteran and why Native people serve. Now let's talk about many of the mental health disorders that American Indian veterans experience. And of course, among the highest is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. According to the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, roughly 33% of American Indian, Alaska Native veterans using VA care access the VA mental health services. American Indian and Alaska Native veterans who use the VA experience post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, at a greater rate than all other veteran groups. American Indians and Alaska Native veterans have almost double the rate of PTSD as non-Hispanic white veterans, 20.5% versus 11.6%. A 2016 VA tribal consultation with all 567 federally recognized tribes identified treatment for PTSD and mental health as a top priority for veterans in Indian country. So to your right, you can see a chart here that measures American Indian experiences with mental health disorders compared to non-Hispanic white service people and veterans. And it's measurably higher. So when we've talked about all of the other issues of colonization, assimilation, land loss, loss of homelands, which are 2 unique things, and also the loss of culture, these compound on top of all of the other mental stressors that are involved with being a service person and a veteran. And you can see this measured here in this chart. So I want to talk a little bit about ways of healing. Aside from formal services through Veterans Affairs, therapists, and other programs that are offered through the United States military services. American Indian people have a unique way of working towards better mental health and healing from the scars of service. One of those is through ceremonies. So what I have pictured here in the top left corner is a frame for a sweat lodge. So a sweat lodge is a widely shared practice among American Indian people throughout the United States. It is even a pan-Indian practice where people come together and enter the sweat lodge for a ceremonial practice that lasts for several hours, sometimes overnight, where there is prayer and solidarity among the participants. The other is showing a picture of sage and smoke and an eagle feather. So using sacraments in terms of sage and tobacco and sweetgrass and cedar as a way of cleansing yourself of these mental health challenges that connect to service as a part of self-care. Also, not only the person trying to address their own issues in a Native way, but as Native people, we take care of our veterans and have a responsibility to do so, and we honor their service, both active and retired. And in the bottom left corner is a new memorial that is at the National Museum of the American Indian, and it is a veterans memorial to honor veterans service. So this is a public memorial site that Native people and the public can come, and we can share hearing the stories about the experience, pray, and honor folks' service for serving in the military. The other way that the community comes together to honor service is through veterans powwows, to dance and to share songs with one another and honor the service and the experience that veterans have. So this is a flyer from Wisconsin for a veterans powwow, and up at the top right corner is an honor song at the Gathering of Nations to honor veterans. We're going to talk a little bit more about ways community supports veterans. So veterans and soldiers are one of the most honored roles and highest honors American Indian community honors for an American Indian person. American Indian communities understand the burden and responsibility a soldier carries. We honor their service. Native community has an obligation to take care of our veterans' mind, body, and spirit. To do this, we publicly and privately acknowledge their service in public gatherings, private gatherings, and ceremonies, as well as support them in caring ways. So that can even mean listening to the stories they have to share, being a shoulder to lean on, doing activities with veterans and soldiers in ways that could include a hike, or spending time, or sharing a meal, or bringing family and community together just in support, and maybe not even fully addressing the burden that they carry, but with the cultural understanding that that is what we are doing. Again, we talked about the profile of veterans, and one of the things that carries forward, and I think is very difficult for veterans and soldiers to cope with, is the cultural way of being that you don't express your emotions, you don't express weakness or outwardly show any signs of vulnerability, which could be deemed as weakness. These could be seen as cultural imperfections, but they are real, and it is ways that Native people, how we express our identity with one another. But sometimes those things can be challenging, and we're going to talk about ways that some veterans have dealt with those cultural constructs. But we do support and we love one another, and show the support for veterans in a multitude of ways, and we honor their service. So I wanted to cover a few military soldier profiles through different campaigns of war. So I wanted to start with William Lowry in the Revolutionary War. William Lowry was Lumbee. He was a young patriot who fiercely believed in the principles of American independence. During a skirmish with Tories here in Robeson County, Lowry received a deep cut across his hand, resulting in a dramatic, visible scar that he carried for the rest of his life. This embattled scar served as an ongoing reminder of not only the war, but also the political strife that followed his family and community. And I want to stop here and talk more about this. Even after the Revolutionary War, a lot of the political ideas remained very diverse from home to home throughout the community. And the Lowrys ended up moving because of their Whig beliefs were in opposition of their neighbors. They moved about 10 miles away and reestablished their lives a little further east into Robeson County. And so there was ongoing tension well after the war that kind of not only followed the family, but it was definitely carried forward in the community for a long time. After the war, Lowry was known to be an aggressive man. It was widely known that he was forever haunted by the war and was not the same man that he was, of course, after the war. He was probably about 18 or 19 years old when he was in the Revolutionary War, and probably a carefree young man just in how people talked about his identity. And he was a much more solemn, aggressive man. When he applied for his pension, in fact, he went before a pension committee and slammed his hand down on the table, pointing out the scar across his hand to say, you know, this is what qualifies me to receive a pension as part of being a Revolutionary War soldier. So it definitely left mental scars on him, as well as physical, that were probably not addressed throughout his life, with the exception of community support. He never really talked about the war, which is a common thread that we even find today among soldiers. So a common practice among Native community and a lot of other soldiers as well is you really don't talk about the war itself or the battles that happened. But family, we understand all of the harshness of war, and family and community still support that person and understand that there are probably some internal battles that they're struggling with. He gave a great quote later in life that he mentioned, "You never leave the battle," meaning that he was still fighting the war internally, even though, of course, the war was long over. Stayed with him for the rest of his life. Angus Chavis has a really remarkable story that I will just read through this slide, and this just paraphrases. His story is online. If you look up Angus Chavis, I think it's a Lumbee Confederate soldier. There's a great full story that's written by Dean Chavers, Chavers, about Angus, his capture at Fort Fisher, and then his subsequent being put in a military prison in Elmira, New York. But I just want to read through a little bit of his experience. Angus was an enlisted man in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. He was drafted in 1863 at 15 years of age as a drummer boy. He was just a kid. Less than 2 years later, on January 15th of 1865, Angus was captured at Fort Fisher, North Carolina in a final battle. He was in the 1st Battalion, North Carolina Heavy Artillery, Company D, under Captain James McCormick. McCormick and his second-in-command, Lieutenant Thomas M. Argo, were both killed in assault on the River Road Gate, according to Fort Fisher to Elmira, A Fatal Journey of 518 Confederate Prisoners, a book by Richard A. Trebe, published in 2010. Angus was a prisoner of war and spent the next 5 months in a federal military prison. So Angus would have been about 17 years old. The Yankees transported him along with other prisoners by boat and train to Elmira. The prisoners called it Helmira. There were 12,122 Confederate prisoners at the Elmira prison, and 2,933 of them died, the highest death rate of any Union or Confederate prison, which at 24.2%. 7 of the men in the 1st Battalion died at Helmira, and 6 died in the prison at Point Lookout in Maryland. Angus was one of the lucky ones. He lived. He was in the 54% still alive. When the war ended, he left Helmira around June 13th of 1865. He had to walk all the way home to North Carolina from near the Canadian border. His shoes were worn out, so he stuffed rags into them, and when they were worn out, he tied rags around his feet to substitute for shoes. He walked through part of New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and North Carolina, about 650 miles. It took him a month and a half to walk home, and he relied on the kindness of strangers to feed him on the way. And I will say Angus Chavis is part of my family, and his mother is my 3 times great-grandmother. And it was said that when he walked up into the yard, he was nothing but skin and bones. He looked like a phantom of a person, and his mother didn't even recognize him. And when he said to her, you know, "Mama, it's me, Angus," whom she thought was long dead, she wailed out, and her cries could be heard across the community. Angus went on to live a long life, and it was said that Angus had a unique void in his eyes, that there was just something very haunting about him. He never talked to anyone about the war, and the ongoing battles, the mental health battles of the war stayed with him for the rest of his life. He did go on to become a successful soldier and had farmer, and had a family of his own. People often asked him, because of the story of him walking home was just so widely shared among the community, and in fact became legendary. They would ask him about his story, and he would get very upset and say, "I don't talk about that, and I don't want to talk about that." So again, a way of suppressing the mental scars of battle. Next, I want to talk about Delano Cummings, and he was in Vietnam. He is also my cousin, and we call him Dale affectionately. And in the early 1990s, Dale ended up, after years after the Vietnam War of battling issues with alcoholism to address his mental health issues, ended up renting a home and writing a book called Moondash Warrior, where he chronicled his experience in the Vietnam War. I mentioned earlier that he re-enlisted 3 times looking for a friend that was in his unit that disappeared, which he never found. And he tells a great story in this book, Moondash Warrior. You could look online to find it. But writing was Dale's way of healing and getting the story out without explicitly talking about it. He went through a VA program that encouraged veterans to journal some of the challenges that they were having, mental health challenges that they were having stemming from the war. And the journaling went and inspired him to do the book. So this was a unique way of him addressing his mental health by writing. The book has become widely popular. It is still in print, if I'm not mistaken, and Dale travels the country talking to other veterans about their experiences, and he has received countless, if not thousands, of letters from veterans who share how this book has helped them with their own mental health challenges. And so I want to conclude and say that today, addressing mental health from an American Indian cultural perspective is challenging in a post-colonial America. American Indian people continue to engage in traditional practices of ceremony and other spiritual practices to address the mental legacies of war. But compounding on top of those issues that we've talked about earlier with land loss, loss of homelands, loss of culture, loss of specific ceremonies and practices that even address that warrior spirit, it's challenging, but we still continue to press forward and even develop new ways of healing. It's not perfect, but it is a challenge that not only veterans, but community is helping to support veterans with these mental health issues. In addition to veteran services, many Native communities have developed new ways of healing our veterans from mental health issues such as PTSD. The military services are working more closely with tribes to include tribal methods and practice for mental health healing. And so veterans offices are including the practices we talked about of sweat lodges or ceremonies or healing circles where people can talk among other veterans and soldiers in solidarity about their experiences. Also, most tribes have tribal veterans affairs offices, and these offices provide services, mental health services for veterans and soldiers within their community that will speak to and employ unique or specific tribes' practices, cultural traditions for dealing with and addressing mental health issues among American Indian community. Again, before closing, I want to preface that mental health issues are very important. They are challenging. There is not a perfect solution to addressing mental health issues among veterans and soldiers. But as a community, we work closely with our soldiers and our veterans, and we honor their service and are vastly indebted to their sacrifice that they make for our communities. And we cannot thank them enough or love them enough. So thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing in this presentation.